Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Post Up with David Grubb right here on Boot Crew Media. I, of course, am your host, David Grubb. Thank you for setting some time aside to watch the show. And after yesterday's press conference featuring Joe Dumars, today we got the full Pelicans media day featuring Willie Green and the players. And I think the thing when you talk about media day, the one thing you don't want to do is lose media day, right? Like, I think as fans come into it and as the media comes into it, you're looking for all the signs of optimism. You're looking for the reasons to believe, and you want confirmation that optimism is the course of action at the beginning of the season. Nobody wants to walk into the season and feel like this is going to be a disaster. You want to come into this and say, I'm excited about where we are. I'm excited about our potential. I'm excited about what we can be. And I think the Pelicans delivered on that in most ways. I think the players did a fantastic job by and large, particularly the players that you wanted to hear from. They answered in the right ways. And there were some other things within their comments that I think that were important. But I think overall, they came in and they presented well. I think the concern is, Willie Green. I'll just start with there because Willie led off the commentary for the daily questions and answer period with the media. And it still feels like there's just a lot of vague generalities. And certainly part of that is his demeanor. That's who he is. He does not like to give a lot of specifics on a day-to-day basis. And certainly the things that you took away from Willie's comments were that he has established a really strong relationship with Joe Dumars, that they converse regularly, and that's consistent with what Dumars said yesterday. The part of it, though, as you get into the basketball of it, there wasn't a lot to make you feel like things were going to be different other than a reinforcement that they will be. The commitment to playing with pace, the commitment to rebounding the basketball. We've heard those things before. We've heard this team say those are points of emphasis. We've heard the team say this is what they have to do, but you have not seen that translate. And there were a couple of questions that I felt were unasked. And I think part of it is just the flow of how things go. And you are only given a certain amount of time, and the media staff is going to pull them away after, they don't want them to be up there for too long. They want them to answer their questions, give what they have to do, but they're not there to give interviews. And I get that. But I think there were just some opportunities that were missed for follow-up questions with Willie regarding his philosophy, regarding his adaptation, and regarding the specific things that have been problems for him in the past. I would like to see, what have you done to improve the way your offense translates to your players? Have you determined these roles in a lot of ways, and just instead of saying we need this guy to do this, like in the sense of, we need him to score, we need him to pass, we need him to rebound, we need these players to do a good job defensively. What are the individual things that were set aside for players this offseason from the team expecting growth? What were their sentiments as far as saying, this is what we want to see out of you when you return? The players gave a lot of those answers as to what they worked on individually. Joe Dumars talked about the communication and having guys in the building. But for Willie, I think when you are dealing with a person who feels like he's perpetually on the hot seat from fans and from the media and nationally, you are looking for someone to assert why there will be some change and why you can believe in it. And as the head of what's happening on the court, the things you're looking for improvement for Willie are late game situations, utilizing the rotation. If Joe Dumars is saying this team is going to go 12 deep, which I find unlikely, no NBA team consistently goes 12 deep. There'll be nights when you do that, certainly, and you want to extend your bench to 9 or 10 on most regular season nights because that's in your best interest to keep guys rested in the playoffs. We know bench is shortened to about 7 or 8. But I don't think they're going to play 12 every night. I just don't think that happens, especially when they have to get off to a really good start. So how are you going to maximize minutes? And you can say that the rookies have to prove that they're going to earn minutes. But no matter what, when they get on the floor, they're going to make mistakes. So how do you give them opportunities to make those mistakes and still be competitive? What is his philosophy regarding that? Because you've invested a lot of capital in these two players. the things that Willie talked about as far as going overseas and the bonding that'll take place on the trip, that was consistent with everyone else. I think that we could have asked a few more questions about the relationship between Willie and Dejounte and how that's mended in the offseason. If it has mended, did they take that as a direct comment about how Willie coached his team? And a lot of guys will say, well, the past is the past. We don't need to talk about the past. But some of the things in the past have an impact on the present and will impact the future. I say, if you don't study the past, you are doomed to repeat it. Right? So I think there are certainly things within the recent past for the New Orleans Pelicans that you need Willie Green to analyze. How will you generate the kind of tempo that you say you want to play at? How will the defense improve rather than just saying we've got some better players back here? How do you get this team in position to where both your offense and defense are top 15 in the NBA? How do you get to that position when you have so many of these players who are going to be learning their roles? Now, certainly, I think you have to be encouraged when they talk about the relationship between what the veterans have done and the young players coming in. I think that was a tremendous comment on how these players have worked together in the offseason, and I think that's vital because most of your improvement is done in the offseason. It's very hard for young players in particular to get opportunities during the regular season. In practice, you are there to get the regulars going. You are there to make sure that they are prepared. You're not working as much individually on your game during the regular season. So for these rookies to have been paired with veterans on this team, have gotten counsel already to have these deep conversations, these long conversations as relayed by the players, to have a sense of what's going to be required of them in the NBA. And I think some honest talks about what they will not be able to do early on in the NBA. That, this is a process that you will fail, that you will be embarrassed some nights by these people who have done this job professionally for a bit longer than you, who are stronger than you, who are older and more experienced than you. And I think that's a good thing for the development of a Derek Queen and a Jeremiah Fears. And though they were not the first to speak, Jeremiah Fears in particular was very impressive. When you think about the rookies, I think Jeremiah Fears was consistent again with what we have thought of him since the draft process began. That this is a young man who has a lot of poise, that wants to be great, and is a student of the game of basketball. Those are really important requirements, particularly at the point guard position. You need to have someone who is dogged in their approach. You heard a lot of talk about him being a gym rat, that you have to tell him to pull it back. And I think that's always better when you talk about athletes, that you'd rather have them dial it back than need to be the kind of player who needs to be dialed up externally. Kevin Garnett crossed the line plenty of times, but it was a lot easier for his teammates to say, hey, KG, slow that down a little bit, because he was already motivated. He got himself into that lather before each game. Whatever it is that you require you mentally to be prepared, coaches would rather have to say, slow it down than pick it up. And I think Jeremiah Fears understands that innately. The one concern I had when it came to Derek Queen was that a lot of this talked about how funny he was, how goofy kind of he was. And that's the impression that I've had of him from day one. It was a little intriguing again that he was in Baltimore on Monday night. And yeah, it's not a long flight from Baltimore. And ultimately, this is not a big thing in the grand scheme of things. But he's in Baltimore Monday night for the football game. It comes back for media day. And yeah, I don't think they're practicing. They start training camp tomorrow. So it's not really missing anything. And it's a great opportunity to stand there with Carmelo Anthony on Monday Night Football. And he's living out the dream. But it just feels like, as far as maturity goes, that Fears is ahead of Queen. And these two positions are the positions that take the longest to adapt to in the league. When you're a 3, you're a 4, you're a 2, and you're getting within the offensive flow, you're able to just take shots as needed. You're given the opportunity to have the basketball in your hands consistently. You can start performing and contributing a lot earlier. Point guards, because of the ability to make decisions, the requirement to be an extension of the head coach on the floor, understanding everyone else and where they need to be in addition to what you're trying to do as an individual offensive player, along with as a center trying to understand how to play off of others in a league that doesn't feature centers offensively as much as it did even 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. When you're in that situation, that's a learning experience. Learning how to attack the glass is something that you have to adjust to, the physicality, all of those things. So it makes those two positions much more difficult. And for Derek Queen, who I continue to say will be counted on first amongst the rookies because of the amount of players at the guard positions and the limited number of players in the post, Queen, I see that he loves to play basketball. I'm not doubting that. I'm not doubting his skill. I just want to see the approach get very serious very quickly. And you hope that in his learning from these veterans, and we'll move on to the veteran that was mentioned plenty of times today by a number of players after. But this is why I think the pairing of veterans and young players with the Pelicans is so important. Not just in building this nebulous concept of culture, but in teaching immediately the theme of this team, which is essentially, put in the work to be great. That is a very different approach than I think what it felt like the previous 4 years. Under David Griffin, the goal was, let's build a strong family. Under Joe Dumars, the approach is, we have to compete to be great. You have to fight for it. You have to show up for it. You have to claw for it. You've got to be committed to it. He says, if you're going to win, you have to be obsessed with this. Jeremiah Fears looks obsessed with this. I'm not ready to say the same about Derek Queen. That is not to say that he is not. I'm just saying the evidence points to Jeremiah Fears has that look. He has that look. We could be wrong. But I think if you watch the two of them today, if you watch Jeremiah in particular, I think it leaps off the screen his leadership and his understanding of his place. That what he has been brought here to do. Now, when I talk about the veterans having an impact, the one that consistently was brought up by everybody was Kevon Looney. And there was some talk this offseason about his value relative to some of these other centers. And what you get out of Kevon is the work ethic, the physicality. One of the things Yves Missi in particular talked about was his approach to rebounding. And I think if you've ever watched the 30 for 30 on the Detroit Pistons, or you watched The Last Dance, when Dennis Rodman talked about rebounding and understanding how the shots come off the rim and who shoots it and it goes long, who's shooting and it comes to the right, all these things. The great rebounders view it that way. It's not simply go get the basketball. They are paying attention to who's on the floor, particularly on the offensive glass. To be a great offensive rebounder, it's about positioning, but also understanding your shooters. And Kevon Looney has worked with some of the best shooters in the world, obviously. Consistently throughout his career, he's been around teams that shot the ball great, but those misses become that much more valuable in those situations, right? Getting the offensive glass, because if you're used to guys being pure and making shots, you can get complacent in that. You're going to make these shots. Staying alert on the offensive glass and teaching that to a player like Yves Missi, who's already an exceptional offensive rebounder, both in number and in rate last season, to give him those subtle tweaks, which in the post are huge. It is a game of nuance down there and understanding positioning, understanding how to use your body, how to use your shoulders, how to use your hands, all those things, whether it's on offense or defense. Kevon Looney's done it. He's been a focal point offensively at different times in his, collegiate and high school career, where Yves Missi was not. And I think when you look at the two of them, the complement of their skill set, I think this is a great mentor for Yves Missi because you're asking for the same things out of the two of them. You're asking for them to hit their screens. You're asking for them to convert offensive rebound opportunities or be able to kick them out for open shots. You're asking for them to defend at a high level. You're asking for them to be a presence in the paint to deter teams from attacking the basket. And when you look at the way Yves Missi came back this season physically, you saw a broadening of his shoulders, even from what we saw, it feels like in Summer League, that he has continued to progress physically, that he looks significantly bigger than he did, where last season I think he was around 215. It seemed like maybe 220. It looks like he is a legitimate 235. Just that you can see him starting to develop. And the understanding of roles for him, and if you go back to the late last season, whether it's in the bird rights or the bird calls or even this offseason, earlier in this offseason when we talked about Yves as a player, I said the big thing for him this offseason was just learning how to finish. When we critiqued his Summer League performance, it was because he was stepping outside to shoot mid-range shots. And it seems to me that somebody got in his ear after Summer League. And I think that was a huge, whoever called it, whether it was Joe Dumars, Willie Green, whomever, got to Yves Missi and said, no. That's not what we're asking you to do. We don't need you to step out and pop out and knock down 15-footers. That is not your role here. And for Yves Missi to say, when somebody asked him, I think it's fine to ask that question, but somebody asked him, have you been working on the three? Are you going to step out more this season? And what did he say? He said, I got to get finishing down. I have to be able to convert opportunities around the bucket. And so to see him understand that that's what his role is going to be with this team, knowing he may get 4 or 5 touches a night in real, that don't come off the offensive glass. How do you maximize those opportunities? How does Yves get his points, which I think if he is a 12-10 guy consistently for the Pelicans, if he's giving you 12-10 and Kevon's giving you 7-7, if you're getting 19 and 17 out of those two combined, a lot of nights you're going to be in a position to win some basketball games. And I think that the pair of them will be able to improve this team defensively in the front court. The big question remains in the backcourt, and how do those guys defend? And ultimately, when you talk about the defense, it starts and ends with Herb Jones. And Herb was another player that came in today and was consistently Herb Jones. The best thing about Herb Jones is that you know exactly what you're going to get from him every time you hear from him, every time he steps on a basketball court. And it was good to hear him talk about his own medical progress, to discuss the healing of his shoulder. Certainly, if Herb Jones is out there fishing again, then you have to be happy about that, because if Herb's fishing, that means he's doing that for several hours at a time. He's out there enjoying himself, and he's going to put in the work. So he looked ready to go. And after Joe Dumars said that both he and Trey are going to get 100% cleared as of training camp, then when Herb comes back and people ask him about individual accolades, do you want to be Defensive Player of the Year? Certainly the competitor in him wants to be recognized as the best individual defender in the NBA. I don't think anybody's ego would say they don't want to be recognized. But I think when you talk about what Herb Jones understands as well as any other player on the Pelicans, and I think why Herb Jones continues to be a favorite of Joe Dumars, of Willie Green, and of his teammates, is that you cannot survive without that guy. Without having that guy who will sacrifice everything for the team. And when Herb Jones discussed his contract extension and said, this is where I want to be, and they paid market value and maybe got a little bit of a savings, quite frankly, considering where the league's salary cap is going to go. But for Herb Jones, his commitment to this franchise, and I think it is very important that a team have one of those players around that they've grown, that they've developed, that understands consistently what the expectations are of the organization and represents it well. And the Pelicans are fortunate to have two of those guys. I think Herb Jones did an exceptional job, again, of talking about what's necessary for him to do his job well and his understanding of what his teammates are going to need from him. The question is, does Willie Green put him in a position to be his best? Does the ball rotate offensively so that he can take those corner threes? Do they run enough motion so that he can cut to the basket and get a couple of easy layups? Do they get in transition enough because of the overall defense, whether it's him creating turnovers or just forcing missed shots, so that Herb can get onto transition and be the kind of effective total all-around player that the Pelicans need? Like, for Herb, the value in him is his versatility and in his ability to do the unseen things, to create screen assists, to be able to pick up, an offensive foul every now and then, from him just pestering the other team's best player. He saves you points on one end and he generates points on the other for other people, at the very least, if not himself. People are better when Herb Jones is on the court. And I think that as long as the other teams understand this, and this comparison that people do with Lou Dort, go look at Lou Dort's numbers. Outside of his 3-point numbers, he's not better. He's not putting up better numbers than what Herb Jones has put up the last couple of years. Lou Dort scored 10 points a game last year. I firmly believe, again, when they look at Herb Jones, what Joe Dumars sees is a young Dennis Rodman. Because if you remember, Rodman wasn't, what was Rodman scoring as the starting small forward for the Bad Boys, who at the time were leading the NBA in points scored, by the way, the number one offense in the NBA when they were winning championships. Dennis wasn't on the court to score. He was on the court to make things happen for everybody else. Right? He won Defensive Player of the Year, making things happen for everybody else. Getting those block shots, getting steals, creating havoc. And I think that Herb Jones, not going to be in contention for MVP or anything like that, but I think you're talking about a game-changing player. Certainly, we talk about his classmate in this in Trey Murphy, and I think Trey was the most impressive today. Close with him and Jordan Poole as far as their comments today. Trey again continues to project himself as a franchise player. Him talking about understanding what people have said about him, what they have said about the franchise, and taking mental notes and saying, I'll remember those things. And when I accomplish what I'm supposed to do, those people will remember what they wrote and what they said. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that's what my takeaway was. That's what motivated him this offseason. He talked about rehabbing his shoulder, that he couldn't work on his 3-point shot while he was rehabbing it, so he had to work on his mid-range, putting the ball on the floor. He talked about the awareness that it's going to take this season because teams are going to ask him to handle the basketball even more than they did last year. They're going to force him to put the ball on the floor. He's going to have to score at all 3 levels. He's going to have to continue to get to the free throw line. He understands that he needs to be a great two-way player. And all the great ones get that. Show me an MVP candidate or a champion who is not great on both ends of the floor. SGA, All-NBA defender, MVP. Jason Tatum, All-NBA defender, Finals champion. Jaylen Brown, All-NBA defender, 24, 25 points a game. Right? You keep going back. Look at the defense and the difference offensively for when Nikola Jokic is on the floor. Look at what happens to the Philadelphia 76ers when they have Joel Embiid and when they don't. Look at what happens. You just go throughout. You have to be impactful on both ends of the floor. And Trey Murphy is committed to being impactful on both ends of the floor. But it also consistent with what Joe Dumars says. And you heard Trey talk about, he's had these conversations with Joe. He feels like that he's been able to communicate with Willie Green and talk about things with Willie as well. And I think that's an important piece there, because they have not always seen eye to eye. So for Trey Murphy and Willie Green to be working better offensively in particular, I would imagine, if Trey feels like he can start commanding some leadership and saying this is what we need to do and this is what we can improve on, then I think the team is better off for it. You can have one leader per se, like one who surpasses all, but you need a team full of people willing to take responsibility. As Joe Dumars said, it's not simply talent. It's doing the work daily and also being accountable for yourself and others. The core of this team, the four players, Jose, Trey, Zion, Herb, the four who have been around the longest, they will play for each other. They will play for everyone. The question is this mix still the kind of mix that over the course of 82 games will get you into the top 10 in the West? And I think it is ultimately. But I think you don't particularly learn something on media day, again, other than what you are confirming for yourself. When Zion Williamson gets up and he talks about his offseason, he talks about the conversations he's had with Joe Dumars. He talks about the conversations he's had with Willie Green. He talks about how hard he worked this offseason with Teresa Witherspoon and with his teammates and how impressed he is with the rookies. Cool. There was a part of me that wished that Zion had said more about his evolution as a leader. It's still, again, like when they asked him, what does greatness look like to you? I mean, his answer is very generic, but I would say Zion has never been particularly interesting in interviews. I'm not saying the young man is not observant. I'm just saying he's not particularly interesting. You don't get a lot of great quotables out of Zion Williamson. I just don't think he enjoys talking with the media. That's not who he is, and that's fine. But the best things that you could say about Zion, because I think everything that you hear from him, you have to take with a grain of salt. And because of his availability questions, the best thing that you saw about Zion Williamson was that he looked like he was in shape. And for the second year in a row, that's the case. Like legitimately good shape. Previous years, I think he didn't look bad, but he didn't look svelte. And he looks, tapered. It's not as much of a rectangle as it used to be. There's more of a taper for him in his shape. The shoulders, remain broad, but the face is angular. You can see the bones in his face, in contrast to what I've got going on here. But, I think Zion looked good. But he could have said bibbity bobbity boo, and no one's going to care until we see how many games he's played at the end of the year. Now, he said that the Pelicans have told him that he needs to be, better. I think you're encouraged when he says that he feels like they've uncovered a way to make him feel better, that he says he hasn't felt this healthy in going to the gym in a really long time, since dating back to college and high school. So those are encouraging signs. If he feels like he's found a regimen that works for him, if he feels like he is on in a good place with the medical staff, if he feels like he's going to be stronger and better this season, those are great signs that there's a confidence and that he's open about it, and his confidence in the staff, because that's been a question mark for fans and how they feel about the medical staff. But if Zion feels like they've got a good system going, and that he feels since the hamstring injury that they're pushing in the right direction, then that's good for the Pelicans and good for Pelicans fans. Last season, he was held to 30 minutes a game. If he can get that closer to 34 to 36 minutes a game, you got something. You're talking about 27, 28 points a night if you can get him consistently on the floor for 36 minutes. He's going to be that effective. Now, the question that I would ask for Zion Williamson was, while you don't have a point guard, During these months while you wait for Dejounte to return, and we'll talk about Dejounte in a minute, while you're waiting for Dejounte to return, you're going to probably be the primary ball handler. How are you, Jordan, and Trey going to work this out? How are you going to balance creating for each other with getting your own shot? Because it can't just simply be, coming down each possession and just, as the Pelicans have done in the past, dribbling the ball out, having one player bring it up slowly, and then trying to get into your offensive sets late in the clock. The whole point is to have some tempo this year, but that means people have to initiate those first and second actions with the basketball. Who's going to be responsible for that? How are these guys getting consistent in understanding who's going to handle the basketball in certain situations? Do you know what kind of sets each one of them prefers? I think that makes it particularly difficult for Jordan Poole, who was much more efficient last year, but still was not the lead guard. Throughout his career, his job has been to score. Throughout his career, Trey Murphy's job has been to score. Throughout his career, Zion Williamson's job has been to score. And yes, they create opportunities for others. But you've got three guys that are not passers primarily. And then on the interior, with Herb, who's more of a connector than a creator, and Missi, who's not going to be getting a lot of assists at all, maybe 1 to 2 a game, if that. The ball movement has to be really, really good, and the offense has to be very, very quick. The ball and player movement have to be crisp. And I don't think there was enough questioning of the players in regards to that. But again, I don't think that's always an issue because of what the media wants to do. I think it's an issue of how much time you're given and how the questions get parsed out. There are people there for different reasons. There are people there who are there to pick up stories. And then there are people there who are looking for, broader based angles. And then you have the people there who are there to ask basketball questions primarily. And I'm one of those people who's there primarily to ask basketball questions. And so I think some of those basketball questions, and I think people did a good job by and by in asking those, some of those just fall by the wayside due to the way the structure of media day goes. You kind of wish you could get the opportunity for more follow-ups. I think that's the biggest thing, is when you hear something, you're not really able to respond to it, to an answer. You got to kind of hope that somebody else picks it up for you before it gets back to you, where you just got to be a little bit obnoxious, I guess. That's the word for it. Though I don't think it's fair to call it obnoxious, but sometimes you got to fight for your question. You got to fight for your question and ask it, whether they want to hear it or not. But again, I don't fault any of my colleagues for that. I just think it's a tough structure to get through. But Jordan Poole, moving on to him, I thought gave an exceptional performance. I think what you were looking for Jordan Poole was that you wanted to see maturity. The knock on him has been that his commitment to basketball has not always been there. That's the knock. I'm not saying that's true because, again, I've watched that young man since he played at the University of Michigan. I'm a big Michigan fan. And I've never seen it. I think his play style was loose, but I don't think of him as a person who necessarily was immature or made bad decisions. He could just be offensively reckless at times. And I think that's a basketball player, not necessarily the person. But what you saw today gave you the indications that, again, he's a maturing player that understands what the opportunity is for him, who talked about not getting a lot of support the last couple of seasons, and nor should you when the goal for a team is to just simply be as bad as possible. Well, now he's in a situation again where they're expecting him to contribute to winning, and he looked like a player who's committed to doing that. He has been in the facility consistently. He talked about his ability to create for himself and for others, and the dynamic qualities he brings. Every one of the players around him brought up how dynamic he is, both as a player and in the locker room, that he's one of those people that has a personality that people just notice and take notice of. So I think that's something that this locker room needed. It needs a jolt of personality. You have some very serious dudes in this locker room, some very serious ones. I think, they can make jokes, but I think you also need somebody who can bring up the energy itself, not just the excitement, but the energy, and understand, like, I want to run. And I think Jordan Poole wants to run because that's what he's best at. So, the one question that the Pelicans have had is somebody to push the tempo consistently. Just get the ball going, whether make or miss. And I think that's with Jordan Poole. If he can do that consistently, if he can push the tempo constantly, that's going to be how he gets his points and how he's able to create for others. Because I think if you get him in half court situations and you're asking him to simply create that way, you're not taking advantage of his skill set. So you want the ball to move quickly. You want him to stay engaged. I think that's what the best options are for this offense, is that if he doesn't have the ball in his hands, he's moving. I'm saying, like, you keep him in motion. You make defenses chase him. I think you let Trey be more of a stationary option, that where he's going to be because of his size. He can get his shot off against other opponents. He's going to, on rotation, he could end up with, in most cases, even if a guy's similar size to Trey, he can shoot up above them. But if you're taking advantage of what Jordan Poole does and you're making the defense work by having to account for him running through screens, relocating constantly, that's to the benefit of Zion. It's to the benefit of the other players on the court, and it gives the defense more than one thing to think about. Far too often, the Pelicans can be defended because everybody's right in front of you. Right? You can defend everybody because you know exactly where they're going to be. They're stationary. So if you're running Poole, you're also creating options for Yves Missi to stay engaged. You're allowing him to screen and roll. You're allowing him to drop back into the dunker spot. You're getting people going. You're getting Herb Jones sliding back up to the top because he's got a screen and then move away for when Jordan Poole comes into the corner. So you're getting Herb back at the top as a connector. He lets go of the basketball, cuts through the center again, goes off to the opposite wing. If you're consistently moving the basketball that way, which is what this offense is supposed to do, then I think you're giving Jordan the opportunities to get catch and shoot, and then to catch the defense out of position to put the ball on the floor and get to the basket, which he has done very well throughout his career, and get to the foul line. Because again, you've got to get those free throw attempts up, and the two guys who are going to do that for you outside of Zion Williamson are Trey Murphy, who got to the line a good number last season, and Jordan Poole. Jordan Poole got, I think, 6 free throw attempts last season, maybe more. But, I mean, he was consistently getting to the line. So you want to get him in downhill situations. And if he's just standing out there to catch and shoot, he's not going to get downhill. If you're just playing half-court basketball, you're not optimizing him. And I think Jordan understands that. I think his teammates understand that through their connections in these pickup games. The part that I think is going to determine whether or not the Pelicans figure this thing out this season is when Dejounte comes back. How long does that take? Because Dejounte Murray, who also came in looking stronger than he did last year, upper body wise, he's been doing a lot of work. It's clear. He says he's been playing. He says he thinks he can beat some people in one-on-one right now. I don't know. I think that, and he says that's his confidence. Okay, we'll go with that. But I don't think he should be on the court immediately, even if he thinks he can. But we'll see. But I think that the transition of what happens then, and it's a good problem to have if it all works. But I think absolutely if Dejounte can come back and can provide that starting point guard role, because the Pelicans don't have a real point guard on the roster at this stage. You're hoping all these guys that Fears can learn how to be an NBA level point guard. Jose Alvarado's really, he's by height, he's a point guard, but that's not really how he plays, and then Jordan Poole's a lead guard, not a point guard. So you're hoping that Dejounte can come and stabilize that position. If Dejounte can stabilize, I think you're even better in bringing Jordan Poole as a 6th man to start and then part of your closing unit. Because the advantage there for Jordan Poole, I'll get back to Dejounte after this, but the advantage there for Jordan Poole is he gets more shots. Because if he's in the starting lineup with Dejounte, Trey, Zion, the shots go down at the start of the game. If he's coming off the bench, he gets that first wave of second unit players, and he's a first unit talent. You're putting him in that Manu Ginobili role. Do what you do. Do what you do, man. And you'll find out really quickly what kind of night it is for him. You're allowing him to get into a rhythm his way. And if you can get that, whether it's Dejounte Murray or hopefully that's the role that Jeremiah Fears grows into, is being your starting point guard. And if you're keeping Jordan Poole for next season and beyond, it's as that 2 guard who comes off the bench but closes for you. Because I think he's certainly been a guy who can play well in clutch moments. For Dejounte, what I wish had been asked was, and for Willie too, was about their relationship. I would have liked some insight into how this bridge has been repaired. Because when you say publicly what Dejounte said, that you felt you were out there balling all alone, that can't simply be just about David Griffin, because Griffin's not on the court with you. There had to be something else besides what's going on in your personal life that you felt on the court, not in the locker room, but on the court, that was not getting you prepared and putting you in a position to win games on a nightly basis beyond the injuries. That was clear from his comments. And I don't know if you got the kind of explanation that you were looking for. A lot of it is, the past is the past, the past is the past. But how do you work with Willie Green now after those comments? Did y'all clear this up? Did you have a meeting about this? Did you talk to the other players about this? Has there been input in how this offense and the defense are going to be run? Do you see more openness between the coaches and the players? Is there going to be more feedback and more creative tension, so to speak? Ultimately, your head coach has to have the say. But as you saw in New York with Tom Thibodeau, as you've seen in Denver, as you've seen in other places, if your head coach cannot be flexible, if they cannot communicate both with the front office and the players, then they cannot survive in this NBA. And I want to make sure that if you've got a $30+ million asset and you're planning on investing in the time for his rehab and him to get back on the court, that when he does get back on the court, there's not a problem between him and my head coach. One way or the other, it has to be rectified. So I think that, again, Dejounte is not a factor at the beginning of this season, but how he interacts with this team as he gets himself healthy and what he contributes when he comes back will be as big a factor in what the Pelicans do this season as anything else behind the health of Zion Williamson. So I think that when you look at what Dejounte brings to the table, it's still very much up in the air in trying to figure out what that was, because he talked about defense and people talked about the length on the perimeter for this team, where you talk about Trey and Herb and Dejounte together, the kind of length that they bring defensively. But Dejounte has not been considered an elite defender for about 4 years now. Well, this would be the 4th year going into it, but 3 years in a row, he's been considered a declining defensive player, more interested in playing the passing lanes than playing consistent defense. Steal numbers are high. That doesn't mean you're playing great defense when the opposing point guard is living in the paint. So can he get back to being a difference maker? Because the shots, he's not going to be a 22-point per game scorer anymore. Not for the Pelicans. Not if things are going right, because Zion should be getting 20 plus. Trey should be getting 20 plus. Poole should be getting 20 plus. You're getting points out of these other guys. Dejounte should not be a 20-point per game guy. So he's got to make sure that he's getting his assists up, his scoring efficiency up, his three-point percentage up, his turnovers down, and his defense has to be better. That's a lot. That's a lot. So do you think Dejounte can bounce back and do all of those things? Do you think he can bounce back and do all of those things? That's going to be what determines whether or not he's in New Orleans for a part of this season, all of this season, or into next season. The rest of the guys, what do you want to hear from Jordan Hawkins? That you're here to have a better season? Yeah, we know this. What do you want to hear from Jose Alvarado that you don't already know? And this isn't a slight to any of these guys, but I mean, the rest of media day, you're just, okay, thank you. Thank you. There'll be important pieces and they'll be nights when you really want to talk to them about what's going on. But we know what's important this season. We know who's the most important this season. And none of that will be figured out until we start getting into real basketball action. So when you talk about what is the purpose of Media Day, it's to reinforce whatever confidence you have in your team. And I think Pelicans fans, after today's Media Day, continue to feel excited about their basketball team. I think they heard what they wanted to hear, what you wanted to hear out of Joe Dumars yesterday. And I think for the most part today, you got reinforcement that you can feel positively about this team, that they have the requisite chip on their shoulders, as teams that underachieve from one year to the next should have. They have players who are coming back with something to prove in Zion and Trey and Jordan Poole and Herb Jones. And you have a lot of guys who have something to prove. You also have the urgency of some of the, not only having something to prove, but knowing that your future could be on the line, whether it's in New Orleans or in the NBA. You have Kevon Looney on essentially a prove-it deal to show that his value to the Warriors and as a basketball player is greater than what people expect. You got Jordan Hawkins, who has to prove that he belongs in an NBA rotation. You have Yves Missi to prove that last year was not a fluke. So I think when you look at it that way, the Pelicans gave you what you wanted to hear. They gave you reasons for optimism. I think for Pelicans fans, the part that you're concerned with is you've been given reasons for optimism in the past, and then you got kicked in the teeth. But you're willing right now to smile and stick your face out again. You're willing to trust it. You're willing to be Charlie Brown as Lucy puts that football down. And maybe this time you'll kick it. Maybe. But as of today, you're in that moment before you start running towards the football. When you have optimism, when you have hope, when you have belief that this time it's going to work. And that's great. Because there have been too many times as a Pelicans fan where you started the season and said, I don't know about this. And I've seen people talk about this is the most excited they've been maybe since Zion's first year. This is a talented team. You heard them talk about this. You heard Joe Dumars talk about this yesterday. But talent does not win playoff series. It's important. Excellence wins. And you don't have to have everybody putting up all-star numbers for excellence to win. So let's see if the Pelicans can be excellent. I did, before I want to go, I wanted to give a shout out to all of the people who reached out to me, who reposted and retweeted and even contacted the Pelicans organization on my behalf over me not getting a credential. As I said, I knew when I started with Booker that was a possibility. So, I have to eat that. I just don't think it was the right decision. And I'm not going to, yell at the Pelicans for it. I'm not going to, set myself on fire in front of the building or anything like that. Like I said, I'm going to continue to do what I do. I just think it was the wrong decision. And you can have disagreements. But I am humbled again by the number of people who have said what my place in the media is here and have respected what the work that I try to do and the product I try to put out. So I am really thankful to y'all for doing that. You didn't have to. I appreciate that you have. And I've appreciated all the people who have, reached out just to give me some support, whether it's been my colleagues, whether it's been friends, whether it's been people who watch the show, and and people who don't always agree with me, hit me up too and just said, hey man, you're part of the fabric of this. And so, I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful. So that'll do it for today. We'll be back on Thursday, much more of a formal show. I won't be live again. I'll record that one, and it'll be more of a formal show with topics to discuss as we get ready for the Pelicans to head over to Australia to start their preseason action on October 3rd. They'll be playing their first preseason game in Australia. So we'll certainly be talking about that. So until the next time, make sure you follow on social media at DM Grub. And you can also find me on Blue Sky and TikTok and Facebook as well. And until the next time, this has been the Post Up with David Grubb on Boot Crew Media. I'm me, you're you. See you on Thursday.